All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to Letter from the Editor. Very special podcast today, very relevant to the times going on. I have LA Superior Court Judge Joel Lofton, good friend of the family as well, joining us today to talk about some of maybe the legalities that are pending or that are upcoming in this whole unique situation of the coronavirus, things to expect, things to look out for legally. And then also to the left of me, I have Andrew, who's a lab tech at a Stemcell Research Lab with a degree in microbiology. Both of these gentlemen used to train Jiu-Jitsu with me back in the day. So I figured good opportunity. Joel called me up one day. It's like, hey, let's talk about this and let's help educate some people. So here we are, gentlemen. Thanks for joining in.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks.
And so Joel, let's start with you. There's a lot of unique rules coming out in an attempt to control this COVID-19, otherwise known as coronavirus. What are some of the things being put in place, and what can people expect as far as, I'm not going to get ticketed for walking down the street or anything like that, right?
Well, I think you could still get ticketed, but there's been a lot of changes that I haven't seen in my lifetime. Not that I'm that old, but the main things that happened with the courts is you had basically LA Superior Courts. You have different divisions. You have criminal, civil, family, probate, mental health courts, juvenile. The non-essential courts have been basically shuttered for an extended period of time. For example, civil. These are private lawsuits between parties. Criminal, domestic violence, restraining orders, family court remain open, but the access is more limited than it was before the outbreak of COVID-19. Will you still get ticketed? Yes. I mean, there hasn't been a ban or moratorium on law enforcement activities, but they are trying to reduce the county jail population. And
from what you've heard, we all hear on the news, the pending or the possible pending rules and regulations that are going to be put in place. Governor Newsom, he's talking about, what's called secure and safe, or what's the terminology that they were using?
Shelter in place or stay at
shelter
home.
In place.
Shelter
Yeah,
in place.
That's it.
These are new times. You have the governor giving basically a statewide order with guidelines and definitions of who can stay, businesses that can stay open, businesses that have to close, when people can leave their homes, under what circumstances. And then you have various cities and municipalities also giving their own orders. And sometimes those are in conflict. So there's confusion of which one takes priority. Is it the state? Is it the local? So there is some confusion. And I think the governor and the mayors are trying to work out maybe a more uniform policy.
And what can people do to stay up to date outside of the news? It's always been said in the past, if you have a problem, call your local congressman, or call your congressman, or maybe your local city council or anything like that. So if people do have questions about these types of issues, where can they go to?
I would go to the local website. So if you live in the city of Burbank, you probably want to go to the city of Burbank's website. But you got to remember the governor is taking he's not taking a law enforcement attitude into enforcement of these rules. He's using social pressure. He's not bringing in the National Guard to enforce his edicts. Just common sense things about reducing density, not going out unless it's necessary, not going in big groups if you do go out, but you're still encouraged to go out, whether it's taking a walk or going on a hike on a trail or walking your dog. So the governor at this point, Gavin Newsom, is not, again, threatening legal action, to my knowledge. He's giving guidelines, and he's hoping people are mature enough, use their common sense to follow them.
And all of this is an attempt to kind of quell the whole, pretty much the uprising of new cases of COVID-19 infection and the spread of the virus. And to that, I'll swing to you, Andrew. Are these steps really necessary, or is it a big overreaction, played out by the media? Which side is it? Is it a true threat, or is this something that it's not that serious, but we need to identify it?
It's a true threat. But actually, I had something I want to ask Joel. Is that I know that in England they've recently taken some really drastic steps where they're forbidding meetings of more than 2 people, and I think they've been thinking about similar things in Europe. What's the over/under on whether that's even possible in America, given our unique, values?
Impossible. I mean, I would say.
That's
We have the
kinda what I
First
thought.
Amendment. First Amendment comes with it the freedom of association. So it gets murky if you start taking away people's constitutional rights, even if you do it in their benefit and with good motives. So that's likely not going to fly here. But I was listening to your other podcast, Jim, and you were wondering about the etymology, why it's called the coronavirus. You said, it came from, I love the question. You say, well, how come we're giving it a Spanish name when it came from, when it originated in Wuhan?
Right.
So maybe Andrew could help give us some background. Because I'm a judge, and before that I was a lawyer. I'm not a biologist, so I can't tell you how it spreads, why it spreads, or what the best.
Why it's called Corona.
Or
Corona.
why it's called Corona.
Right.
So maybe we'll let Andrew. But your answer is no. They're not going to be able to in the U.S. Ban associations of more than 2 people. I don't think. But why is it called coronavirus? And maybe you could help educate us on why it spreads, how it spreads.
Yeah. So a little background on coronavirus in general is that coronavirus is a general name for kind of a group of viruses, and this is one of those viruses. And they're not all from Wuhan, and I don't think you could really necessarily place them to China. Maybe they can, but I don't think so. You might remember the other coronaviruses of kind of note.
I don't.
Yeah, no, I think you do.
I concur.
Oh, okay. I actually haven't heard of it
Apparently we do.
No, you have. You think you don't, but you've heard of SARS, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
SARS.
SARS.
That was a coronavirus.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh yeah, and so was MERS. That one didn't get as much coverage, but it was a lot.
Okay. I can't tell you what is SARS or MERS.
SARS? You remember that?
I heard of it, but I can't tell you when I heard of it. I can't tell you what it stands
MERS
for.
is
Sudden acute respiratory syndrome or sickness. I forget what the last acronym is or last letter of the acronym is. But that one did come out of China, and people were talking about in the early days of this coronavirus, which we call a COV, ID 19 or whatever.
Yeah.
Is which is like coronavirus ID 19. Kind of very neutral name because there's a lot of things to discuss here. We'll get to naming later, I guess. But people were very critical of the Chinese kind of response, the Chinese government's response to the emerging threat of SARS in that country. They said it was, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they were overly secretive about spread, that there wasn't good communication in general around the world on taking steps to kind of contain this as best they could, or how bad it had gotten in the country at that time. And so the spread was seen as being much worse than it could have been if the Chinese government had been more open about the spread of this disease. And so people in the early days were worried about this happening again with this coronavirus, and we see that they were right to be worried. Because I've heard that, I'm not sure about this, but that there were reports about this going back to like December, of last year, obviously. And that a lot of those were, not, the information was not passed along the channels it should have been passed along. And as a result, you can take whatever quarantine measures you want, after it's out, it's out. And, it's too little too late. As to your question about whether this is, kind of a media scare or really a serious threat, it is absolutely a serious threat. In some ways, it's a greater macro threat than we are acknowledging and less of a micro threat than we're acknowledging.
And now what does that mean?
So I would say that means that the effect this will have and is already having on the global, the world order that we see, the financial systems, the, economies in these different countries and the health systems, for sure in these countries is going to be massive. But again, the threat to individual people, as long as you live in a state or province or country where the health system is not overwhelmed, this is not killing, people at the rate of SARS or MERS, nor even close. SARS had a fatality rate of around, I think, I leave it written down here, about 10%. Somewhere around 10%. Although among older people, 60 and up, it was about 50%. So you see that, like you would expect from a lot of diseases, especially respiratory diseases, older people and obviously children, the people with compromised immune systems or underlying conditions are a much greater threat. But for the average, person, there's a chance of, sickness, a chance of severe sickness even, but your chance of, not living to see tomorrow is not very high.
Well, I've heard about this before, underlying conditions and compromised immunization systems. What does that mean? Give me an example.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have had lung cancer in the past, you're a survivor of lung cancer, or if you smoke currently, you've been smoking for a while, you are in general much more prone to respiratory infections and respiratory sickness, and you are much more at risk of this virus or of developing more severe symptoms of this virus than someone who, say, has never smoked a day in their life, has never had, any severe diseases, or so on and so forth. It's just, if you have problems like asthma or any other, affliction dealing with respiratory system, or even if you have diabetes or you deal with severe obesity or have other diseases like that, you're in general more more in danger of developing diseases and of having a weaker immune system, and this is no exception to this disease. So,
and by the way, I mean, I know I have a judge right here, but I do want to say, do not take any of this as medical advice. Where we're talking about the stuff that you've researched, you study.
I'm looking more into the mechanics of the virus than actual, and very basic, rundown of that, as opposed to actual medical advice, because this is very, very early days for that. Mm-hmm. And coronavirus treatment is not something that is new, or attempts at coronavirus treatment is not something that is new, but has not been met with a lot of success so far. So,
okay, which actually brings me to my next question.
Sure.
Because earlier you mentioned MERS and you mentioned SARS.
Yeah.
And although those were bad, especially at the time, mm-hmm. I mean, there was something to be alerted by for sure.
Very serious, yeah.
But there's never been a reaction like this. Mm-hmm. Why does this get or in your best assessment, why would something like this get the reaction it has, as opposed to a SARS, as opposed to
a MERS?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I said before, I don't know if I mentioned it, the MERS had a much higher fatality rate or mortality rate than SARS.
Right.
But the key there, because you didn't really hear much about MERS, there's like a note here, an article here about that.
And that's medicine resistant staph.
No,
right?
that's
that's MRSA.
That's MRSA. Yeah,
that's right.
With the but so MERS was Middle East respiratory syndrome or sickness. I forget what the S stands for again. So that had a much higher fatality rate, but the spread was much less than SARS was, and it really comes down to spread. That's the most dangerous part of this disease, is that it spreads so quickly. It seems much more quickly than SARS did, and you can become reinfected. That's another bad thing. Or that's I shouldn't say that. It seems like you can become reinfected, and that would not be out of keeping with some respiratory viruses where immunity only lasts for like a couple months, sometimes maybe a little bit longer. But eventually the antibodies circulating around your blood that would normally recognize the virus and target it, to be destroyed, their level drops dramatically after a couple months. And so it would not be out of keeping with respiratory viruses if you could become reinfected after a couple months with COVID-19 again.
So what are some of the treatments in place for something like a SARS, and is that pretty much the approach that maybe doctors want to take and address, our researchers or whoever's responsible for combating this? Is this the approach that they want to take for COVID-19 as they did with SARS? And what are the mechanics of creating a vaccine? You get a trace amount of the actual virus, and
I mean, there's a variety of ways to make vaccines, these days. As far as treatments go in general, for coronaviruses, SARS obviously is the one that's kind of freshest people's minds. They tried a few things. They've tried some kind of broad spectrum antiviral drugs that mess with the reproductive cycle of the virus in the cell. I believe some of them are related to HIV drugs, which are dedicated to containing the spread of that virus and making it reproduce more slowly, and essentially buying time until the immune system can kind of do its job and preventing the infection from getting too bad. And there's been some qualified success with that, or at least there were with SARS patients. I'm not sure how that's working with COVID-19. I believe they are using those, that general kind of class of drugs. Aside from that, I'm not sure how much success they've had with treating coronaviruses. There is actually an interesting example of a coronavirus that, if I'm not mistaken, afflicted swine in Europe a while ago. Because coronaviruses, there are many of them.
And that was another big one, so the swine flu. I
mean, no, that wasn't a swine flu. That's not a different thing.
Oh, that's a different.
That's a different thing. Yeah.
Okay.
This was a coronavirus that affected swine. Swine flu is an influenza virus that affected swine, because influenza also can affect a variety of animals. Coronavirus can too. And actually, that was a point that I kind of got distracted from a ways back, is that one thing I didn't know, actually, and I don't think most people know, is that the coronaviruses we're talking about, SARS, MERS, and this, have all been traced back to bats as the principal carriers. And so the idea that they're from China in particular is not necessarily true. They were most likely from bats that were in China, but as far as the spread, and the origin of the virus in bats in general, we don't really know. So that also is why, there's a research lab in Wuhan, I believe, that studies bats and about viruses in bats, because bats harbor a lot of different viruses and many coronaviruses, many different types. And given the recent SARS outbreak, or more or less recent SARS outbreak, it makes sense that they would be studying bats, since they have a very advanced facility in Wuhan to study, I think, viruses. But getting back to the treatments, the swine in Europe, there was a major problem because there was a coronavirus that I believe it was afflicted the gut. Actually, it was an enterovirus, because the coronavirus can target different tissues depending on the type of virus. It just happens this one is a respiratory one.
So they're not all respiratory?
No, not at all. They afflict different parts of the body. The respiratory and the enteric ones, the gut, are the ones that I'm most familiar with, but there are probably more, or others. Yeah, we call that the tropism of the virus, which part of the body it affects. And the entero ones, the gut ones, are fairly common. And actually, I've heard that the coronavirus can be found in some amounts in stool and feces. So I'm not sure what implications or ramifications there are for the waste workers and wastewater treatment, but anything you would use to treat wastewater would work on that, I imagine. I don't see why it wouldn't. So,
and that's I guess the whole idea of the coloquin that the president mentioned. Is that what it's called? It's used to treat malaria. It's a malaria treatment, and apparently there was some sort of success.
Oh, well, that'd be weird, because malaria is a totally different.
It's
a full on, Anyway, I'll look that up later. Maybe.
Okay.
But sorry, I'm getting distracted again. Is that the swine, they had this coronavirus, and what they eventually did, I'm not sure if this was on purpose or it just happened to happen this way, is that there was another coronavirus that infected the swine. And after the swine were infected with that one, they were, I think, totally resistant to the other coronavirus, or much more resistant to that coronavirus.
Okay, so which brings me to antibodies. We do have we do hear about cases of people that are, they've made it through, like Tom Hanks, for instance. He's still with us.
Okay, I didn't hear an update on that. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if he's out of the window. He may not be out of that 14-day window. What do you think?
I thought he was, but
yeah, I thought he was. But
if he's not dead yet, he's got a pretty good chance.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good chance. So, the idea of maybe extracting some of the cells from someone who has successfully, their immune system successfully fought this off, taking the antibodies from, those people and creating a vaccine out of that. Is that how it works? Is that the approach that we can probably take in the combat of this?
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, they've tried making vaccines for the coronavirus before, and some of them have just done nothing, and some of them have made it worse. So we're not the mechanics of infection, I don't think, are well studied enough at this point that we can make an effective vaccine. Maybe not. I mean, there's work going on everywhere. I mean, the papers are coming out like daily on coronavirus, and research labs are, they're working away because everyone wants to be the first one to say, I cured coronavirus.
right.
How does it affect the respiratory system, though? So give us an example. I mean, if you contract it, what does it do? And also, my understanding is that it hasn't been fatal yet to minors. So if you could explain how it affects respiratory system and why some people, or is it dangerous to all spectrums of folks?
It should be dangerous to everyone. If no minors have died from it whatsoever, that would be surprising to me. They would be, depending on how young they were, like if they're like, I don't know, I'm not going to give an age. I'm not
Well,
totally sure what
essentially, the way I've been just kind of talking bro science with my friends is anyone in diapers. Anyone in diapers, you want to keep them away, whether they're young or old.
If you're young or old, for sure, you should be keeping away from this. Actually, that's a point I wanted to mention about, because I know people are talking about bird flu a lot, or about not bird flu, but the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu, right?
And making comparisons to that, and that relates to the kind of the elderly and and children being really at risk here. Is that what made Spanish flu much worse, and why people should calm down a little bit, before they act like this is the same thing, is that one of the worst things about Spanish flu is that that disease, for whatever reason, disproportionately infected younger people, like 20s to 30s. And what that meant was that people who were supposed to be working on the front lines in hospitals, the young doctors and nurses, people doing heavy lifting, people doing, frontline medical work, were disproportionately targeted by the disease and died off. And so that crippled the response against it in many places, because people who were supposed to be doing all the work were the ones who were the most at risk for getting it. So in some ways, we are, I'm not going to say lucky because we're not lucky, but it's not as bad as that, because it seems like this doesn't have that kind of strange infection of the 20s, people in their 20s and 30s, and that it is more the classical older and younger are the most at risk, which they are.
And excuse me, can you explain the mechanics of herd immunity?
Oh, that's
how does that work?
That's a little different, but I'll definitely talk about it.
Sure.
Is that so herd immunity is usually what you hear when people talk about vaccines and about people opting not to get a vaccine. And on the surface of it, you might say, well, they don't want a vaccine. Why not get it? And overlooking the problems of they're not able to consent because they're not adults and they don't, We're not going to get into that. But the idea is that if a certain number of people are immune to a disease, and that's, a really high number, like, 95, 98%. I think there might be an actual number, but the number escapes me. But extremely high, almost 100%. If there are some people in the herd, so to speak, who can't get a vaccine because they're immunocompromised, or they just have some problem, they just can't get a vaccine for whatever reason, there isn't enough of a potential reservoir of disease among the herd for it to have a good chance of spreading. So it's not impossible those people will get the disease, but if 90% of the people or 95% of the people are immune to a disease, chances are it's not going to spread in the community. So even if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to get the disease. If it falls below that, then suddenly your chances of getting the disease are much higher, and if you're not protected against it, then you're out of luck. So as far as that would apply to coronavirus, you might have a community, if it sweeps through and infects, like 95% of the people there, and somehow those people all survive, the remaining 5% of people will be fine for a while. But the problem with the coronavirus is that it can sweep through again, potentially. And depending on whether or not it is able to reinfect, you might have those communities, that herd immunity would not last as long, in other words.
So do you think this is in very much the same way as the flu? We have a flu season.
You do have a flu season.
So is this the dawning of a new age of we're going to have a coronavirus season?
It's possible.
So
we have to wait a few years to really see, this thing, it might fizzle out, the things might just get better.
Maybe.
What about temperature? Does it matter? Like the summers, when the summer comes, is going to be any reprieve to the coronavirus? Does it have any effect on the
Yeah, we've heard about that.
I think people were talking about that, but I think they were thinking about influenza. Maybe they were thinking about past coronaviruses or trends in coronaviruses, but the ones I've heard have been just referring to influenza and the flu.
So you're saying the summer months, as it heats up, it's not going to have any effect?
It would depend on whether the mechanics of the infection or of the lessened infections had to do more with social behaviors or the actual viruses themselves. Because if it's just social behaviors, then maybe. But if it's the viruses themselves, then no, because they're two different viruses. So it really depends on why there are less, infections during the summer months of influenza.
So let's get back into the transmission of the virus. So is there a difference? Like we when you guys came by, we elbow bumped. So no more knuckle bumps, no more touching the faces and all that stuff.
Yeah, don't touch people.
So that's on living. Not even. Cause
No.
In fact, let's go to. I was going to say living organisms, but our animals, like pet Frodo, is he going to be affected? If I go pet my dog, what do we know about that?
So I mentioned MERS before, and one of the things about MERS was that even though the virus originated in a bat, it was able to be transmitted via camels, or at least everyone. It's pretty widely assumed, if not proven at this point, that camels were able to carry the virus and transmit it to humans. So and the coronaviruses have been found in other mammals and in I believe birds as well. So there are vectors, there are creatures that can carry the virus, not necessarily show symptoms, but even non-living, things like just surfaces like tables or safety rails, door handles. The virus can survive there for quite some time. So I don't think that just touching it would be enough to infect you. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not gonna say anything hard because this is still early days, but I don't think so. But if you touched it and then touched anywhere in your face or you'd be in some trouble.
Okay.
Even if it had been an hour or two since the person come by and coughed on the handle.
Yeah, I heard
Table,
something,
whatever.
and this again, I just heard, and
A lot of herds right now because
But why is touching your face? Why is that the trigger?
because that's how it gets in. You have a nose in your face, a mouth on your face. So,
Okay.
and if it's like influenza,
Gets into your lungs.
eyes, potentially as well.
well,
Okay.
I mean, does that go for walking around barefoot on surfaces?
No, it's not gonna be through blood. I wouldn't think. I mean,
Well, we're talking skin, so like.
Well, he's
if-
not talking skin. He's saying the eyes and the nose.
Okay, so
it's like
the
a flu.
orifices.
From what I've seen, it seems like it's just more like a flu because it's respiratory disease. It seems to be targeting specifically, the respiratory system. I think it was the lower respiratory system mostly, but I mean, you can't get to your lungs, so easily from your foot.
So
It's not impossible. It'll get there eventually because you got blood there. But
and the skin's an organ, right?
Yeah, the skin's an organ, but I mean, it's not like every single cell there has like a no.
Same receptors.
I don't think that's a problem though.
Okay. Because I guess that the idea is the soft tissue, the membranes, like inside your nose, very delicate.
If it's connected to your
eyes.
lungs, then it's probably most at risk, and you have mucus ducts in your lung or eyes. So
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
What
right.
about pets? So let's say
Although that shouldn't really.
somebody gets a coronavirus and they have an animal, and then somebody volunteers to walk that animal for that person. Is that person now going to be in risk of getting the disease possibly from the pet?
Well, it depends if the pet is of a suitable animal to carry the virus. I don't think we know exactly if cats and dogs can carry it. I don't think that they can, but I don't know. But what would be more of a risk is that if you coughed on your dog and your neighbor touches your dog and touches their face, then
Gotcha.
they could totally get it.
Got you. All right.
And breathing on each other, like
Don't breathe on each other.
don't breathe on each other.
No.
All right, Roger that.
Cough into your everything people have been saying. Cough into your elbow. Staying 6 feet apart is good, but I mean,
So so what you focus on, what you report to work every day. You work with
not these days.
yeah, no kidding, right? Nothing. Good one.
I tried to. They forced me out.
But
Who's taking care of your stem cells?
Yeah, we had to freeze everything down.
so stem
People were
cells.
not happy.
So explain the
you
day
got
in the
those
life
stem
of Andrew when he goes into the lab and.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you.
So
a little walkthrough.
you deal with stem cells.
Yes.
Okay. And stem cells, to my understanding, they offer so much promise in treating everything from physical traumatic injuries to like spine breaks,
Yeah, for sure.
organ transplants, to now could it help fight this viruses?
So I haven't heard too much about that, although it's early days. So the idea of a stem cell, do you guys have a basic idea of what a stem cell is?
No.
Okay, that's
I'm a
fine.
dummy.
No, yeah.
I do, but just for the benefit of the audience.
Yeah.
For you guys.
Yeah, Jimmy's here too. Yeah.
Of course, I mean, of course. We were talking about stem cells right before you came in. The history of stem cells.
So a stem cell, there's not just one for one thing. There's a lot of different types.
Okay.
And we generally group them by either where they are or both by where they are in the body and also by how naive they are. So you think, the word naive means, you don't know things. You could say ignorant cells even. And the idea is that the more naive you are, the more types of cells you can create, you can become. And so the more naive, or essentially the most naive cells be the ones at the very beginning, when you're kind of, more in the embryo stage, when you've just been, kind of conceived. And because those cells need to make every cell in the human body. So they're as naive as it's going to get because they had to make everything, And then you kind of go down, the tiers. And until you have, an adult human who has cells that, like in the bone marrow, can make, blood cells, white blood cells, and other things, but nothing else. Or you have, cells in the gut that can give rise to certain cells, that are appropriate for their place in the gut, but, they're not going to make, a bone, or they're not going to make a nerve or anything. They're tissues that need to be replaced, or scales in your skin, because your skin, falls off, gets cut, whatever. You need to replace those cells constantly. So you need cells that are able to make different kinds of skin cells, but again, they're not going to make a brain. You're not going to grow a brain in your hand. You're not going to grow, a bone in just your gut or whatever. You're just replacing cells that need to be replaced. And so the idea is that the cells that I work with are cells that we call induced pluripotent stem cells. Induced pluripotent stem cells. So instead of being like multipotent, which would be cells like cells in your blood cells, which can give rise to red blood cells, white blood cells, what have you. But again, no nerves. And you say, what if I could make this more naive? Regress this so that it can make nerves, it can make bones, can make whatever. And you can take these stem cells from someone that are less naive, and you can chemically induce them to become more naive. And so why this is important is that, and why this could be used for coronavirus in some ways, maybe, is what we use them for now, or what people are trying to use them for now, is taking stem cells from someone with some condition. Maybe let's say they have a genetic nervous condition. Something is wrong with some part of the nervous system. A genetic trait, it's inherited, and their cells are they're malformed in some way, and this causes a problem. So you take some of their bone marrow or stem cells from their skin or stem cells from their gut, and then you put it in a dish. You regress it to become more naive, and then you make those cells into nerve cells, and whatever nerve cells have this genetic abnormality. And those cells, because they have the DNA of that person, they're their cells. They're going to make nerve cells with that condition because they have to follow the same instructions, the same flawed instructions. And so you can have what is at least an approximation of that person's neurological condition in a dish. You say, why is that going wrong? What is wrong with these cells? What are they making? What are they not making? And so, maybe you could take, stem cells from someone, make them pluripotent, and then make lung tissue, and then experiment with coronavirus in that lung tissue. Kind of try to make a model of the disease in a dish to some extent. This is a lot of speculation. The stuff with modeling diseases in a dish, or in vitro, as they would say, that's not new. I don't know if they use it for virus, or for coming up with treatments for viruses or not. But, it's an idea.
So is there the hope of, someone's in a really bad car accident and they break their spine, their vertebral column, is that how you pronounce it?
I'm not a doctor.
Well, in theory, could that area of the body be regenerated, reproduced through stem cells?
Yeah, see, the problem with nerve damage is that when nerves die, and they're dead, in theory, if you want to have that person, walk again, let's say, after their vertebrae is severed or their spine is severed or whatever, and all the nerves, below their leg died, if that happened. Or let's say a simple example. Let's say that for whatever reason, all the nerves in your right arm just died. They're just dead for some reason. They're just gone. So you want to use stem cells to solve this problem. Okay, you got your stem cells in your shoulder right here. Okay, now they have to grow for however many years it took for them to get to the fingers in the first place, which is not how that even happened because they grew along with your arm, to reach that point. So even if you were able to do that, you'd have to have stem cells that are able to grow in the right way.
Same pattern.
Exactly the same pattern all the way to your hand, which is not what they did originally. They followed, your hand, as it went. They grew with
as
you.
a cell.
Yeah, exactly. And nerves don't, naturally, divide and replicate really at this point in your life, or the motor nerves don't anyway. At least as far as I know. I'm not a neurologist though, so take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, so that's one of the problems of kind of.
There's no way to speed up the process.
You might be able to do that, but you might also, create a tumor in a patient, which is what people are and the FDA are always really worried about. because
anytime you introduce anything foreign to the body, it's like, hey, it either takes or it rejects.
The
right?
FDA likes small molecules, which is like your regular kind of drugs, your powders, your creams, or whatever, because over say like cellular cures, because cellular cures are not totally predictable always. There are cellular treatments with a high degree of predictability, and some of the opposition to them is a little bit, unjustified, I think. But there's also the potential for, these treatments being cancerous or carcinogenic. And what they really want out of cellular treatments these days is a kill switch, cells that will respond to some kind of signal, from some kind of drug that will just end the treatment right there. All the cells die.
If it goes bad.
Everything's programmed just to be. It's like it was a thing in Jurassic Park where they just ever kill everything, with some kind of like program. It's like that. You got the cells in your body. Something goes wrong. Okay, introduce the drug. It's gone. Treatment's over. We can stop here. But since that's kind of hard to do,
So bringing it back to
bringing it back.
No, I mean that's all great, and it's I kind of wanted to set the stage of the role of a stem cell, how stem cells are being looked at today, and their role in being in fighting the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I mean, is that kind of out of place? No, you're kind of trying to fit a round peg in a square hole.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. I mean, but it's hard to even say that though, really, because I mean, the treatments for coronavirus so far have not been particularly successful. I don't think there's been at least. Yeah, they have definitely not been unqualifiedly or I don't think that there's been any great, breakthrough in treatment. So, I mean, pretty much anything that works,
Or even in viruses, period.
I'm not sure about the treatment of viruses, stem cells in particular. I mean, if you were going to do something like model a disease in a dish, you might be able to do something with that. As I was saying before, take someone's cells and model a disease in vitro as best you can. The only problem with that being is that cells in a dish in vitro are not going to be exactly like cells in vivo or in a person, just because they weren't developed, developed into, skin cells or lung cells or bone cells in the same environment that the ones in your body were, obviously. Because your body, there's signals going all over your body, all the time as you're growing up. And they're being matured and modeled in ways that we can't do in dish because we don't know how they work. But it's potentially a avenue of research as far as modeling the disease, just the basic mechanics,
So you said coronaviruses have been around for a while.
Yeah.
And to date, do we have any treatment for any of the other strands of coronaviruses?
A lot of them aren't really that severe. A lot of them are, or at least in humans anyway. There are some major animal ones. But the coronaviruses that are really severe, we don't have great treatments for, no. I told you there's the kind of broad spectrum antivirals that they've used, I think with some success, I think, actually.
So why are they saying 12 months? Why is that? They're saying, it'd take about 12 to 18 months for treatment. Why would it take that long? And can they, with certainty, say they'll have treatment within 12 to 18 months?
No, they can't. I mean, it'll probably be around then just because there's so many labs working on this right now. I have great faith in those people because they're very good at their job. And there's a very big incentive to be the person who, if not cured this, helped people to get back to, some kind of reasonable life. But just developing drugs just takes a long time. If you want to be thorough, you want to make sure you're abiding by all the safety standards you need to, just have the minimum, do the minimum to say this is safe in people. This isn't going to cause a bigger problem. Because again, there have been vaccines in the past that have made the virus worse. You have to be careful with these things. Just because it works in one person or even, 100 people or even 1,000 people doesn't mean that it's totally great. It's going to work. Everyone's different, There's differences in people from country to country, but even on a more local level than that. But country to country, definitely, there's differences in people. Same thing isn't going to work for everyone necessarily. You need to really hash these things out, and it takes a long time. And then when you take in, production of the drug, en masse, so that it actually be distributed in hospitals, distributed where it's needed. And, it just takes a long time to develop any drug, even if it's, it seems like a sure thing. And this one, we don't have a treatment yet.
So I see you have pages of notes here. What are some of the important notes that we should kind of take away from this this ball of information that people are getting hit with right now.
Well, do you have any questions in particular you want to know? These are just general notes from me on some of
okay.
yeah.
No, I mean, all in all,
we still haven't gotten to the name.
Correct.
You said, why does it have a Spanish name if it came from China?
Oh, yeah, we didn't get to that, did we?
I was watching your podcast.
Right, okay. I mean, is there an answer to this?
So corona refers to the kind of so the virus itself is like a little ball. I'm sure you've seen the picture on the news.
Right.
It's that picture. You've seen
Right.
the one.
Yeah, it has little crowns on there.
Yeah, that's what it is. Is the spikes on the top kind of look like crowns, and so they call it the coronavirus. Is corona? Is it Latin for crown, or is it just it means crown?
Well,
so.
yeah, it's Spanish, but yeah, a lot of these names have Latin origins, in the medical field.
Anyway, corona is crown, and the spikes they decide look like little crowns. So, and the spikes are actually what allows it to infect the cell because it attaches with those spikes, and then the virus melds with the cell, and then the DNA inside the virus goes in the cell, tells the cell to make more viruses, cell explodes, and then that happens 1,000 more times.
Wow!
And then 1,000 more times, 1,000 more times, 1,000 more times.
Oh, now I'm depressed.
And now, even more than that, actually, this is interesting. I didn't know about this before. I don't know if this is just this or other similar viruses do this. Apparently, when it's telling the cell to make all the parts of the virus, the spikes, the little covering, the DNA inside. Apparently, if there's leftover spikes, the things that help it get into the cell in the first place, those spikes can go to the membrane of the cell, like the outside of the cell, like the kind of outer kind of
right.
layer. They can merge with that, and then that whole cell can infect another cell like it's a virus. So essentially, because those spikes are made to attach to the cell and then kind of merge with it, the cell itself, this huge cell has these spikes on it, touches an uninfected cell, and then it merges with that cell. And there's this big cell, which is also now infected because the virus is in the cell in the first place. And then that cell might get those spikes on it and then infects the other cell next to it.
And that's essentially how viruses work in general, outside of just,
Yeah, the virus usually is using those spikes to get in. But for some reason, if there's too much of the key, essentially, the spike on the outside, that key can actually kind of make the whole cell into a kind of like a big version of the virus, just as far as it merging with the cell next to it and then spreading the infection that way. And why that's significant is that can kind of delay the immune response to the disease. It kind of makes it kind of a quieter infection in some ways. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly why. It's still presenting the markers on the outside, so the antibody should see it. But I guess just because the virus doesn't explode like it normally would and spread all over the body, it's contained in this like supercell of these two cells that have merged together and then merge another one.
And how does it affect the respiratory system? What does it actually do?
So aside from killing cells for making those cells replicate the virus to the point where they burst and then affecting more cells. Aside from that, there's been evidence of a really severe inflammatory response. In SARS, anyway, there was. I'm not sure if they've seen that here or not, but there was a really severe inflammatory response in SARS that caused really serious lung damage. And I guess that might have something to do with it. I'm not totally sure about that aspect of the virus. I didn't have that much time to look up these notes. But yeah, I mean, I assume those two things, just the cell death from viral infection and also the immune response being so severe are more than enough to, the DN if it's bad enough.
And for people that still want to go ahead and do MMA and practice, what is your advice to those folks? Can you get it? What if they just wash their hands?
Don't do it.
Both sides just wash your hands before you.
If you guys live together, then feel free because you're screwed anyway, But if you're just meeting up like as a club, every now and then, I mean, it's your decision,
Just washing your hands, is that not going to be good?
Well, if you're grappling with each other, you're face to face, plenty of
fluid
times.
And fluid too.
Yeah, I love that sweat, but I mean, if spit gets anywhere, and it will, or someone coughs and they're just kind of near your face, yeah,
you're done.
You're done.
So okay, which and to that, another.
Or if someone coughs on a mat and you go face first into a mat, there you go.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what I was thinking when you step onto the mats and you're barefoot. That's kind of the distinction I wanted to make between touching your face, skin on skin right here.
If you step on it, I don't think anything's going to happen to you.
Okay, but if your face lands in that like sweaty puddle,
or if your foot goes into someone's face after that, then yeah.
Okay, so and what's generally considered best practices in your academy is, you have these wipes. You have wipes, you wipe down. I mean, hell, everyone went apocalyptic style with hand sanitizers, but these are antibacterials. But we're dealing with a virus here.
I mean, it's ethanol.
Okay, but what does that all mean? Ethanol kills viruses as well as
alcohol will kill a lot of things. I mean, killing a virus is kind of a weird thing because a virus is not really alive.
We don't know.
Well, because a bacteria, it's like a cell, right? It's like a tiny cell compared to your cells.
And we all know that.
Of course, yeah. Bacteria is a cell.
Okay, well,
virus is
bacteria is because you know about germs. There's a bunch of living things, all over your body, all over the house and the water and wherever. Those are cells. Those are living things. They're just very tiny living things. The virus is like a very, you could either call it really primal or really advanced, I guess, depending on your perspective. But it's essentially just protein and then DNA inside, which is to say it's like kind of building material, because protein's what you kind of use to build a lot of things in your cells. It's like the steel bars and the rebar and the, the concrete. It's just that. And then inside of it, there's just information. And the information says, this is how you make a virus. And the idea is that the virus gets to a more advanced, item or object, like a cell. And then the cell has machinery that allows it to make stuff, And the virus says, make me. And then it makes it. And then because of the way the virus and the kind of the protein code around it is built, it kind of packages itself, and then it keeps doing that, and it keeps doing that, and keeps doing that, and the cell bursts, and then all those viruses go infect other cells they can infect.
And the ethanol, what happens if the virus is? What happens if the ethanol, you wipe it on a table and there's viruses there?
Yeah, so it depends on the virus a lot. There are viruses that are very hardy. There are viruses that just fall apart if they're not in a cell for an hour or so or even less. I'm not sure how hardy this one is to that, but alcohol will kill it eventually. It's certainly not it's not like it's invincible or anything.
And this is not a green light for people to go smash shots of a Jägermeister or anything because it's alcohol, so therefore it should kill it, right?
You could call it alcohol if you want it, but I wouldn't really.
Yeah.
Right. It's like what, like 5% or 4%.
Yeah, it's
not potent enough.
It's like a liqueur.
Yeah, so it's like
don't go do shots of 151 either.
It's like you're pouring water on your hands, essentially. Yeah, it's like it says it's kind of sticky. It's actually it's sticky, so there'd be more virus in your hands because it kind of comes off with it.
Yeah, but you get the point. But I mean, in all seriousness, like people would confuse that with just drink alcohol.
I don't know why you're drinking it. It's not in your gut. It's in your lungs. You want to breathe it in, you can do that, I guess, but you have more problems.
That's pneumonia.
Don't do that, by the way. Don't do that. Don't use bleach for anything.
Okay.
I don't know why people always resort to bleach.
Well, they use it as a cleaning agent.
Yeah, it's a cleaning agent, but your body is not clean.
Oh, not for consumption.
Oh no.
Obviously, that's not for you.
That's what I'm talking about. People were like, "Yeah, man, just drink a thing like a little cup of bleach, just like a little cap,
Oh no.
No, don't do that.
No.
It's just,
No.
it's like, soap and water is the best thing though. Because that'll just scrub it off of your hands,
So that really is an effective tool.
Soap and water is absolutely an effective tool for this.
It doesn't kill it; it just wipes it off your hands.
It can also kill it. But the main thing you just want off your hands, and soap is very good at that. So just use soap.
So is there a such thing?
But if you're out and you need it, hand sanitizer is good too. Yeah.
Okay, and to both of that. Now, is there any value, or is it detrimental to be a little OCD with it and wash your hands too much? Because I mean, we have our natural immune system, we have antibodies on our body, and if we keep killing the good bacteria that help in the fight, is that a risk as well? Washing your hands too much?
It's a risk in general, although there's a lot of debate on whether washing your hands. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. As far as this goes for this virus, I don't really think so because in general, you could say that does compromise the immunity you get just from infecting yourself with various kind of harmless or slightly harmful.
Well, what are the two trains of thoughts?
So the idea is either you're not building up your immune. This is in general. In general, if you wash your hands a lot, you're not being exposed to the bacteria and the potential pathogens that you normally would. Your immune system is not being built up at the rate that it normally would, and you're more prone to infection. And a lot of these things kind of are kind of fuzzy. Just because you weren't infected with something that's super dangerous doesn't mean that the immunity that you get won't be at least partially effective against something super dangerous if it's similar to that. So the idea is that even if you're being exposed to relatively harmless things, they might provide you partial immunity to another threat that may be more serious in the future, maybe. Or that your gut kind of flora or might be more diverse and might therefore be able to edge out pathogenic organisms more easily. But as far as this goes, I don't really know if that's true, because if you wash your hands and you don't have a lot of bacteria and you're not being exposed to a lot of stuff, that's not good for your immunity in general, perhaps, but it's good for your not being affected with COVID-19. So, because you want to get immunity to COVID-19, you could go and get, have someone cough in your face if you want to. You could just
more effective ways.
Done right there, yeah.
Hands.
But I mean,
so go ahead and wash your hands.
Go ahead and wash your hands, I think. Although, yeah. In the long run, for your general immunity, it's not great. But for this, I would say just do it. And there's the issue. Your hands might start bleeding if you do it too much.
Right.
But
so if your hands start feeling really dry, kind of ease off on it.
I mean, that's true, but it's I don't think that it's transmitted just directly through blood, though. So I mean, even if you have cuts in your hand and you touch a surface of it on it, I don't know if it'll necessarily, infect you. Well, I don't know, it won't.
Right.
So don't wash till your hands bleed, maybe, but I don't think it's.
You're not trying to do a sample or control.
I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'll go with that one. Don't wash your hands until they bleed.
Well,
that's sound advice.
It's troubling, though, because I did hear again that there were infection, or there was a virus discovered in feces, which is a little bit weird for respiratory disease. And also, I heard, and I'm not sure about this one. This is the
coronavirus.
This is the coronavirus that we're talking about.
Okay.
And this one is debated, but I'm not going to totally discount it. They did a study about whether this could be transferred from pregnant mothers to babies with people who have been infected. And the first study, they didn't find any transfer, although those babies were taken out with a C-section. So they didn't pass. They were not vaginal births. So it's possible that if they had, there would have been an infection. Okay. And I did see a paper briefly. It may be discredited yet. It may not be, whatever. But I did see a paper saying that there had been one case of a transfer through pregnancy. But I don't know.
And why is that
important? Take
that
with a grain of salt. Well, because then how is the virus really transmitting? How much of it is in the blood that it's going from mother to child? Because the mother's not breathing on the child, obviously. Wow, okay. So maybe, but the baby might be. I'm not sure about the mechanics of viruses when it comes to pregnant women. But the fact that it's there and the fact that it seems like it may be found in feces is something to kind of to wonder about anyway, as far as to where specifically in the body it is, how it's circulating, Yeah,
that's a very good note that this is a respiratory issue, but then why does it wind up in the feces?
It does seem like it does. Again, maybe I'm totally wrong about that, but I did see a few papers that were saying that it seemed like there was a. Yeah, so time will tell about all this. But again, the most important thing, the worst thing about it is the most obvious thing, which is that it's airborne. You can cough on someone, they can get it, because that's much easier, than bleeding on someone or.
But by airborne, that means you cough and it's just like
it's in the droplet. It's in the droplets,
but it doesn't just live in the flotsam and jetsam and.
In the ether.
Ether.
It's in the droplets, and as long as the droplets are in the air.
So it's the water. It's the spittle.
It's the spittle from you.
It's not airborne like in the movie Contagion. The guy coughs and it.
Well, even then, it should be. What they were saying is that the droplets are going through the. Yeah.
Well, I guess wrapping it up. I mean, this has been very enlightening, to understand how some of these cells work. To me, it's very interesting, and a piece of it's scary. But a piece of it is just more of it to me is very intriguing, only because I'm not infected by it and no one really close to me.
I hope not.
But yeah. I mean, the story.
We had our doubts. We're looking at you like the outbreak monkey when we came in. Yeah. Well, where have you been recently? Well, I was in I was in New
Oh yeah, he's in
York,
Canada. He's
Scott
in
back Canada,
he's in
and
Mexico. He's in New
Dubai,
York.
Mexico.
You guys are doing a great job painting a scarlet letter on me right now.
Hey, you know what?
Just saying, you know what happens if we get sick, you know,
Call up Lawson.
you know,
After the quarantine.
quarantine.
So,
MIBs.
wrapping this up, and we'll get back to you, Joel. Is there anything you just kind of want to put out there to the masses, just general
I'm
principles?
not a scientist, so I say follow the advice of I think the CDC. They have guidelines, so if you want to know best practices, go to their website. And I don't like social distancing. I don't like the term social distancing. I think
I
it's
don't
a
like the term
misnomer.
either, even though
I think
it's a good practice, but I hate the name.
Well, I think you have other. I mean, as a judge, we have issues with increased domestic violence because now people are trapped in the homes and have other issues,
that's
right?
true, yeah.
So I don't like the term social distancing. Restrict physical contact. I think that's physical contact. Resist, stay at home if you can. Get outdoors, take a walk, but just avoid physical contact with other people.
And surfaces that may be touched by a lot of people.
Like
And listen to the scientists. Go to the CDC website.
Well,
NCBI, by the way, a great resource for papers.
CBI?
NCBI.
What is CBI?
It's a database that.
wait, and as
the
in
letters.
addition to or N?
No, the N. The letters NCBI.
Oh.
If you type NCBI and then COVID-19 or coronavirus, you'll have a great resource for scientific papers and articles and updates about the disease. So definitely visit that. That's a great resource for everything biology. So definitely go visit that website.
Well, and I'm not sure about your mastery of the Latin language. I know you know some Latin.
I took some quarters of Latin.
Yeah, bringing it back to what we were talking about before. Corona? Is that Latin or
it's
Spanish?
Well, Spanish is a Romance language,
Sure.
right? So it has its
Latin based.
Latin based.
Sure. But Latin, are you familiar? Is that how you say Corona in Latin?
How you say crown in
Crown,
Latin? I did not look it up. I know King is Rex.
All right.
That's all I can remember now.
And
I remember Saipe nihil cogitas as far the brief Latin lessons that we had so many years ago.
Oh yes,
Semper Fi.
Always
Semper
thinking.
Fidelis.
Yeah, Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fidelis. Semper Fidelis.
we'll take it.
And E pluribus unum. And there you go. I'm tapped out. That's all I got. Andrew, what was that organization one more time?
NCBI.
And is there any other parting words that you kind of want to throw out there for people to buy more wet wipes? Any other?
Please don't.
message?
Please don't. Okay, so that's I know that like people are panicking about what if we're going to be. That's why I kind of asked Joel the question earlier about the meetings of 2 people or more. I don't think that you're going to be locked in your homes. I don't think someone's going to come with a chain and put it around your door. So you should not be mobbing supermarkets the way that you are.
No, our food chain is not and I just mean to cut in here, but people are panicking.
Yeah.
And I have taken a look at the governor's orders restricting non-essential businesses. One of the businesses that has not been restricted, that is an essential business, is our food production, our modes of production for food. So there's not going to be a shortage of food at your supermarkets. The restaurants remain open because they're able to get their supplies of food. There's no,
That's a good point.
there isn't any virus, to my knowledge, affecting the cattle, affecting the pigs, affecting the meat. So our groceries, there's no effect on the supply chain. A person I know said, well, this is, it's going to affect the supply chain. It's not going to affect the supply chain. Because if a person is sick working in supply chain, they'll be replaced by somebody who's not sick working on supply chain. It is an essential function, an essential business function is the grocery stores, or the farming industry, people that make toilet paper, for example. So there's not going to be shortages of these items with everything that we know now with the coronavirus. It's dangerous to people with respiratory issues, underlying issues.
General health conditions, yeah.
But it's not a threat to our food supply. So people that are mobbing the stores, relax. Well, relax.
Don't.
I mean, you can if it feeds your anxiety.
No, don't do it because you're making those
shouldn't.
hotspots for infection. The more people who are getting to these stores, the more people who are crammed into a small space, with recycling air or circulating air. It's like, don't do it. Just get what you need and leave. That's not just like, some BS from the government to make sure things run smoothly. It's also really important for managing infection. Like I think I mentioned this before, but I think people have heard this a million times. I'm going to say it again because it's important. It's about flattening the curve. Now that's super, super important because this, as I said before, this virus is not, it doesn't seem to be as dangerous as SARS and doesn't seem to have a particularly high fatality rate compared to SARS anyway. That changes when the hospitals are overwhelmed.
Well, explain flattening the curve.
So flattening the curve is the idea that the current medical system we have is more than capable of keeping the virus, the fatalities from the virus, and the morbidity of the virus down, as long as we have the supplies and the resources that we need and that we usually have available in those hospitals and those health centers. If those health centers are over capacity and we don't have enough stuff for people, we don't have enough experts for people to treat people, suddenly that mortality rate is going to shoot up because you may need a lot of, you can get through this virus even if you're very sick with it, as long as you have the resources to deal with the symptoms, ventilators, things like that. If you don't have those, suddenly this goes from a not particularly lethal virus compared to SARS to maybe as lethal as SARS just because you can't get the things you need. If you had the resources you needed, it would be less lethal than SARS, but if you can't,
and that's the importance of staying.
That's important of managing of preventing there from being more infections, because as long as we have the resources that we are used to having in our health centers, we can manage this no problem. If we don't, then it's going to look like SARS, except times however many thousand.
And what's the reason why SARS did not become as prevalent as this disease?
It just wasn't as infectious, it appears.
Wasn't as infectious.
It just didn't spread as easily. It seems anyway, or we just got really lucky.
Or it killed its hosts at a higher rate.
That's part of it.
50% fatality.
10% for regular people, 50% people 60 plus, I believe.
Okay. And where the COVID virus is like 10% for senior citizens, for seniors.
I'm not sure what it is for seniors, but it's been hovering around 4%, I think, for in general.
And that's today.
That's today, but again, and it'll stay there as long as the health system is not overwhelmed.
And flattening the curve is the rate of infection. So if we had 100 new cases in California, and then the next day we had 200 cases, and then 400, like it's rising exponentially. That's the curve's going up.
If the curve rises above our resources and the people we have to use those resources to treat it, and then we're screwed.
And flattening the curve just means
it's preventing it from getting to that level and preventing the rise from being so high that it gets above our ability to treat it.
Okay.
So I did remember what I wanted to ask you real quick, because those were some great last words, by the way.
Thank you.
But what is the test like?
I don't know, actually.
The swabbing? Well, any kind of lab test where you take a culture or a sample.
In some hospitals, they have done the gold standard, which is real-time PCR, which is you take a sample where you think the virus is going to be found, like sputum, something from the lungs, and then you analyze the DNA of what you find inside. If you find DNA that is consistent with the virus, then they have it, because that's the DNA. That's the instructions that say this is COVID-19.
And is it pretty specific to like mucus? Because they're swabbing deep into the nose, and I'm assuming to get into the mucous membrane.
It's a respiratory infection, so I'm not totally sure where the greatest amount of it will be found.
Okay.
I thought it was lower respiratory infection more, but I might be wrong about that. Okay. But yeah, I'm not totally sure about that. I'm not a doctor. Again.
But you know how testing goes. Like they get a sample, they slap it on a little petri dish, and then
it depends on the disease,
Oh, okay.
But again, the gold standard would be the real-time PCR, which would be just that's not the mass-produced one, I don't think, because this is the one that's really time-consuming and takes some kind of resources. But that would be just does this DNA match this? Yeah, then it's that. And in some hospitals they have done that. But as far as the mass-produced testing kits, I would have to look that up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Excellent. Well, once again, those letters, the
NCBI.
NCBI.
Look up NCBI coronavirus or NCBI COVID-19 if you want a wealth of information on everything about the disease that the experts know about.
Or just the CDC website for just general information.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Andrew, thank you very much. Judge Lofton, Joel, thank you very much. And everyone, good job. Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
All right.